everybody, Tony D with another screenwriting tips for you. Today we're going to talk about nuts and bolts transitions mostly. I talked a little bit about this in previous videos, but I wanted to do a specific video for the nuts and bolts transitions that you're going to make in a movie. Okay, so you got fade in, fade out. Beginning of the movie you fade in, usually from black. Same thing at the end, only the opposite. You fade to black, credits. Typically you only use them once, but if you have an intermission or you really want to show a sort of like a pseudo ending within the film, you might add a fade out and fade in, to really show the passage of time. That sort of emphasizes it. Kind of depends on the genre. Usually a dissolve will do well in terms of the passage of time. That tends to be like a shorter passage of time, or some time passes but things are still continuing, whereas a fade to black and a fade from black will show like a very kind of definitive ending within the screenplay. So kind of depends on the tone and feel that you're going for. Obviously, there are a million cuts in a movie. You don't even see them more often than not if they're any good. Good editors cut on action. So if a character does this or reaches for coffee, the editor will make the cut to a wider shot on that movement because it gives you the illusion of that motion, and the cut is hidden within that movement. So you're not going to see most cuts. Now, the kind of cuts you may transition are cuts that are important to the movie. So if you have to cut to the murderer, you might hear my dog playing just off camera. So if we had to cut to Joan playing with a toy, right now we'd just say cut to Joan running all over the floor. Go, Joan, go. She's running around like a little maniac. If you're going to, come here, Joan. If you want to be in the video, just come over here. Stop running around like a crazy dog. All right. Anyhow, other transitions. You might do a montage if it's 1983. I used to do montages all the time in my screenplays. I used to like them a lot. But I'm kind of from that era, so they were very, known to me. I think montages can still be used, but you have to use them pretty sparingly. You have to not do an 80s montage, which is usually playing a very loud kind of 80s inspirational song and then doing this very long, ridiculous montage. That's not how they're used now. Now they're used more subtly. The music will be a lot softer. It'll be like almost like the montage didn't happen. Usually it'll be an opening montage for the credits. That's still totally acceptable, even though montages are pretty much out of vogue. It's totally acceptable to do an opening credits montage, where you might see a group of characters. I want to say this happened in The Hangover, that one of the characters picked up the others in a car. I think the credits were over by then, but I'm not totally remembering. So that would be an example. One character picks 3 or 4 characters up in a car, and it's a series of shots. There might even be some dialogue. That's kind of a montage if it's relatively quick. Beyond that, you start to get into more esoteric kind of transitions. There's the smash cut. The smash cut is basically just a cut, except it's a more jarring cut, right? It's not a jump cut because you're probably smash cutting to a completely different scene, but it's meant to be sort of like, hey, look at this now. So you wouldn't just smash cut to something that you wanted to be subtle. You would say just cut to. If you were doing a dissolve, again, that's a passage of time. If you're doing a quick dissolve, that implies it's some passage of time, but not that much. It kind of depends on the genre, how many dissolves and cuts you're doing, and you know, what's unfolding in your screenplay. Now you might have some custom-made transitions, like for Memento, the character, spoiler, couldn't remember the past and had to write everything down and sort of figure out, because he had this whole thing where he couldn't remember things. So you may want for a movie like that, I believe it had some sort of transition, you may want a specialized transition that's just for your movie and just for that character when they do that thing. In this case, go back in time to remember the last, 15 minutes or whatever. Now let me get Doggy here. Doggy's finally calmed down. All right, say hi, Joan. Hello. So custom-made transitions can be very important to your screenplay, depending on what you're doing. If you're doing something funny, you can get away with a lot more, of course. If you're doing something serious, if you're doing the more serious it is, the less you can get away with. If the stakes are higher and you want the audience to take it seriously, you don't want them drawn to the transitions, because that can undermine your message and can undermine the seriousness of whatever's unfolding. So you don't want to do things like star wipes or any kind of wipes, right? Those are kind of jarring and lame. I can't even think of an example in a movie that makes any sense for wiping, where the whole picture kind of goes and another picture comes in or whatever. Jump cuts are kind of like smash cuts, except what a jump cut technically is, like me sitting here and then cutting to a closer shot of me, that would be a jump cut, because you would see the jump of my image getting closer to the camera. That's a jump cut. If you cut to something else, it's not a jump cut. There's a rule in filmmaking, the 180 degree rule, right? So the camera's there, the 180 degrees is here, so along this line you can shoot me where you can move the camera 180 degrees in a half circle and you don't break that plane. If you go past that line, it confuses the audience because it makes my position in the room confusing, right? So you want to stay that 180 degrees when you're doing film. So a jump cut basically breaks that rule and it makes things confusing. So if you jump cut to a reverse angle of me, it can be very confusing. So if they jump cut to a reverse angle right now, all you'd see is the camera, what I'm seeing right now. Which you may do to create kind of an effect, right? I'm in a room with my dog, making a video, cutting to just the camera would kind of create like a lonely situation, because it would reveal that the room is empty except for me and the dog. Now if you cut and there were people standing behind the camera and it was like a whole crew, that would create a different effect, like I spent thousands of dollars just to make this crappy video. So it depends on the effect you want. That's what transitions are for. But generally you want them to be invisible. Generally you don't want to draw any attention to them unless you're creating some kind of feeling where the transitions are so important. You need them to, you need to beat the audience over the head with them. But that's rare. Horror movies, dramas, any of those kinds of serious, where the characters have to be taken seriously and their situation needs to be taken seriously, you probably want to stay away from jarring transitions, except maybe jump cuts, which indicate, oh my God, I'm so confused or whatever. But, for comedies and lighter fare, you could do crazy transitions. Alfred Hitchcock got away with more than most because his movies were so well crafted, but he also was very, his transitions tended to be very elegant, even even when he used like over the head shots and things like that. I mean, he really understood the storytelling aspect of filmmaking. So you need some understanding of that to script those things. And you can't get too far down the rabbit hole, because that's also the director's prerogative too. If a director's feeling like you've overburdened the screenplay with too many shots, too many transitions, too much notes for him, he may balk under that and decide, screw the screenwriter, I'm gonna, create all my own transitions. And then the opposite happens. He abandons everything you've done just to do something different. It's not cool, but it happens. Hopefully you will work with your director and producer together. And I had a producer and a director who were so great. They were out of Boston. Unfortunately, the movie's not being made yet, but maybe someday. Man, we just had such a great rapport, and they had very few changes, and we were all on the same page. So when you get that good rapport, you don't have to worry about it. But be prepared. Be prepared for that. You may, I worked on a screenplay, and I was very specific. I won't say which one, but I was very specific about the murderer and how the murderer needed to be revealed, and they just ignored it. And the movie suffers, I think, greatly because of that. But that's just me. So when you're working on these transitions, think about them, picture them in your head, picture the scenes, read the scenes out loud to yourself, and, feel the flow of action as you're writing. Other things you may need to put in a screenplay that are transition adjacent are things like sound effects and keys. So sound effect would be like sound of a foghorn or something like that. Again, you only want to use them when absolutely necessary. You don't want to call out sounds that we all know going to happen. If the phone rings and someone answers, you don't have to put a separate sound effect for the phone ringing, right? Typically. You might to draw attention to it. So, you might have a scene where the phone is going to give away somebody's position and they can't stop it from ringing. So that may be a case where the sound effect plays an important part of the screenplay for whatever reason. Maybe it's a horror movie or a monster movie where the monster is attracted to noise and the phone is ringing and nobody could reach it to stop it. And then at that point, having that sound effect, phone ringing, again, is something you may need. But typically for a phone ringing, you wouldn't need it. You would just say, the phone rings and so answers or whatever. If it's an unusual sound, definitely point that out. If for instance, somebody's phone was ringing and the battery was dying and maybe the phone's fading and maybe it's making static noises if it's a cell phone, that might be something that needs to be specifically mapped out. And don't be afraid, if the sound effect's important to the screenplay and the plot and the action, don't be afraid to describe it if it needs to be described. If it doesn't, then use the shortest amount of words possible. Music, similar situation. If you need a specific song, put it in there, but understand that if it's a popular song and it's copywritten, you either may not get it, or people may say, oh, we can't make the screenplay, this song, we'll never get the rights to it, So you have to be flexible. So if you need a country music song in a scene, and you don't have to mention the specific country music song, then instead of putting a title of a song by so-and-so, just put music, country music song. Now you can go a little bit further in the description. You could say, peppy country music song, or sad country music song, or, borderline rock, hip hop country music song. Whatever you need, or terrible country music song, whatever you need to describe it, if it's important, take the extra words to describe it. And pointing that stuff out is totally fine if it's important to the screenplay. Now, if it's just background, just put that in the description, you know. Somebody walks into a honky-tonk, or if somebody walks into an urban bar, let's say, you could say light music playing in the background. That way it gives the producer, the director, and other people working on the movie the flexibility to put whatever. Now, you definitely want to put the type of song because the tone is very important in a screenplay. You know, you don't want some, because they could end up picking a ridiculous song. But if you want, you know, soft jazz, you know, soft jazz plays in the background. That's what you put, and then they can go get Kenny G or whatever, whoever they need. If it's rock, say a loud rock song plays in the background. That's kind of, you know, scene is, it's up and people are moving around and they're talking excitedly. So put what you need. That's what screenplay writing is all about. It's just what you need. You have to be very economic with the words. Just want to get to the point, because it's very hard to get people to read these damn things. And the shorter they are, the better. You know, you still have to max out your pages to the minimum length, but, you know, shorter is better than longer. 125 pages is technically acceptable to a producer, but he's a lot happier if you hand him a 90-pager. He really is. Because 90 pages feels tight, you know? 90 pages, like 90, 91, 92, it's like a sweet spot. You know, the producer isn't going to worry about that. They could always make the credit sequence go on another 30 seconds. You can always, you know, throw in an ad-lib scene. You can always add more. It's not a problem. 100 pages, 95, you know, anything like that. I mean, really sweet spot's more like 94, 95. I mean, that gives them like 2 or 3 minutes to cut out. But typically, they're going to come back with a rewrite anyway. Somebody else may rewrite it. So if they feel it's a little short, they're going to come back to you and say, oh, you know, why don't you add another scene here or there to explain X, Y, and Z. Sometimes they do that. You know, it's no big deal. A lot of times you can go back after you've written a screenplay. You go back 6 months later and you look at it and you go, oh yeah, they probably use a scene here to clarify things. You know, or a scene just to give the audience a breather if it's like a non-stop action roller coaster ride. You want to maybe throw in this like light scene where the characters kind of rest and catch their breath and maybe get a drink of water so the audience can sort of do the same. You know, not really, but it gives the audience sort of the mental relaxation. Because, you know, as much as I love movies that are relentlessly fast-paced, they can be exhausting, and it can be numbing if they're too fast-paced. And if there's too much comedy and there's too much action, it can be exhausting. You know, you need a couple of scenes where you can kind of readjust your seat in the theater, maybe see what your drink status is and your snack status, maybe think about running to the bathroom if things have slowed down, you know, in a movie, but kind of depends on the film. All right, so that's the nuts and bolts of things. If you have any questions, comments, please put it in the comments here. If you're watching this on BitChute, I can take tips, so feel free to tip me. You can also go to my Patreon, and if you like what I'm doing, also go to my websites, the Webcomic Factory and Superfrat. Check out all the webcomics. Hey, and if you need a screenplay written, you know who to call. My name is Tony D. This is Little Joan, and good night.